Well, I'd like to start off by reading to you a quote that I heard recently. And it's an interesting quote. It's one that I've heard kind of posed many different times, but I liked the way that it was asked in this specific instance. And it's actually what kind of inspired this sermon, was this question. And the question goes as follows. It says, who would have the audacity to claim that they believed in God if they examined the way that they lived? Who would dare to say that? And it's a tough question, isn't it? It's a tough one. Because to believe something, to really believe it, that means you live it out fully. You're living it, right? It's not an on and off thing. Belief means commitment. And let's be honest, we fail a lot. Anybody here not fail? Exactly. So how dare we claim the high standard that belief requires? Who are we to claim that title of believing in God? I mean, after all, Romans 3:23 says, all, not some, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Amen? So essentially, it seems like none of us are qualified to claim the title of believer because we all fall short of belief. We as the centurion said, help my unbelief. Unbelief is everywhere. We fall short of that standard all the time. And in fact, you could even argue that the story of God's people, or dare I say, the legacy of God's people, is failure, is falling short. Some examples. Jonah. Now, we don't know a lot about Jonah. He kind of shows up and disappears. One little story about him. We don't know where he grew up, where he went. We don't know if he wrote a lot more. We don't know even who wrote the book. All we know is God at least called him for one specific thing, and that was to go to Nineveh. Personally, I wouldn't want to go to Nineveh. But God said, go to Nineveh, and Jonah, of course, said, absolutely, I'm going to go to Nineveh and do what you want, right? No, Jonah looked at Nineveh and said, I'm good. In fact, he got on a boat and went the opposite way. And ignored, I'm going to go the opposite way. And then God says, you know what? I'm not done with you yet. Prepares a storm. The boat's tipping this way and that way. Everyone's terrified. They cast lots. Jonah's fault. Throw him off the boat. Instantly, storm goes away. Guess they were right. It was Jonah. Fish swimming around the water. Looks up. Oh, look. Lunch. Eats them. Spends a few days in the middle of a fish. Fish eventually goes, spits him up on the beach. And Jonah says, I guess I'm not running away from this one. Makes the walk to Nineveh, probably quite begrudgingly. Goes into Nineveh and says, fine, I'm going to tell these people what you want me to tell me, what you want me to tell them. Give them their last chance, because God said, this is their last chance. This is Nineveh, the city's last chance to turn away from all the evil things that they were doing. And then Jonah is like, I've heard the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I've heard about God burning cities. I'm going to go up to the top of the hill, and I'm going to watch him burn another one. It's Sodom and Gomorrah part 2, and I'm here front row seats. And he just misses the whole point. So basically, Jonah runs the opposite way, puts in minimum effort, doesn't believe in the work that he's doing with God, curses God, says that I want to just die. That's Jonah. Not a great example of a Christian, right? Another example, Solomon. Now, Solomon had everything going for him. He had all the accolades. He is the wisest man who ever lived. He is the king of Israel. He is a top judge. He is the son of David. If anybody had a good group of advisors and good upbringing and good people around him to keep him going on the right path, it was Solomon. He had everything going for him. Certainly, he would be able to make it, right? Certainly, his belief would be solid, right? Certainly, he would never stray, right? Solomon decides to marry 700 women, have an additional 300 concubines, an unnumbered amount of princesses. That's a lot of women. And a lot of people from other religions and backgrounds. And he said, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to go and worship their gods too. I'm going to go and worship Ashtoreth, the goddess of Zidon. I'm going to go worship Milcom. And I'm going to build a temple to Moloch. Does anyone here know Moloch? Who's heard of Moloch? Do you know who Moloch is? Let me tell you, just so you can get some context of just how messed up Solomon was. Moloch is a god of war. And the idol to Moloch was a giant bronze statue, big. It had the body of a man and the head of a bull. And in the stomach area, it was like an oven. It had an opening. And that opening would send the smoke out through the nostrils. So kind of like the raging bull type thing. But they weren't lighting fires in the belly of the bull. They weren't lighting wood on fire. It was for the sacrifice of live children. And Solomon saw that practice that his wives were doing, and their cultural backgrounds and wherever they came from, which I believe it was Canaan, if I remember correctly. And he saw that and he goes, yeah, I'm going to build a temple to that. And not only that, I'm going to put it on the prominent hill right outside the entry to God's city of Jerusalem. I'm going to put it right there, right in front. Talk about an insult to God. And the list goes on. Cain's offering. Jacob and the birthright. Joseph's brothers, Nadab and Abihu. Moses and the rock. Samson and Delilah, David and Bathsheba. Ananias and Sapphira. Achan, Gehazi, Saul, Peter, Nebuchadnezzar, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, all these people set up for success, all failed. Even Adam and Eve. Who had it easier than Adam and Eve? One simple, easy instruction. Don't eat it. That's it. Don't eat it. Now, if I walked up to you and said, hey, I've got this whole meal prepared for you, a giant garden, and there's one tree in there, this one apple, and said, oh, by the way, just don't touch that one. Who would eat it? Especially if I told you, you would. We'll talk after this. What if I told you it was poisonous? It'll kill you if you eat it. Exactly. Now you're shaking your head. All right? And Adam and Eve, I'm gonna be honest. Adam and Eve were with you. 100%. Completely all in, all on board. All right, I've got all these other fruits, all these other foods to eat. Just don't eat that one. No problem. Piece of cake. I'm going to tend to the herd over here. I'm going to figure out what I'm going to call that. Am I going to call it a deer or a fox? I don't know. Still working on it. I'm going to go and pluck those fruits, and I'm going to take a bite of this. Oops. Just like that. That's what they did. Easy as that. Simplest task. Couldn't do it. See, all of us fail. We all make mistakes. And to me, one of the most difficult part about the mistake is that is often it's not the mistake itself, because sometimes the mistake is fun. Sometimes the mistake is thrilling. It's exciting. It's cool. But eventually, it always comes around when you're faced with the reality of your insufficiency. The reality that I don't add up. that I fail. Job, in chapter 40, talks about this. Even though he had so many blessings from God, things went wrong, right? And he spoke to God and said, I am unworthy. How can I even dare to respond to you? He couldn't find the courage to even speak. Or the prodigal son. Luke 15 says, I have sinned against both heaven and my Father, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Or what about David? David made some mistakes. And we read about it in Psalm 88 as one of the most tragic chapters in the Bible, one of the most heartbreaking accounts of misery and despair. And I've kind of compiled it all together and reorganized it a little bit to basically tell what David was going through. And these are exact words that he said. He said, I am forgotten, cut off, a man with no strength left. My companions are disgusted by the things I have done and have all abandoned me. My eyes are blinded by tears. I am overwhelmed. I am trapped with no escape, and darkness is my best friend. Anybody related with David before? Anybody been there? Looked in the mirror and seen the failure, the insufficiency that we are, the fact that we can never quite get there on our own. And one more example I want to give is Paul. Now, Paul wasn't born as Paul. He started off as Saul, and he was from Tarsus. And Saul, he worked with the Sanhedrin. He was studying under Gamaliel to be a priest. And a lot of thought is that he was kind of the guy, like the next guy to be high priest. He was certainly in the running for it. Whenever, I don't know if the guy would be high priest until he retired or until he died, I'm not sure. But whatever it was, he was most likely in the running to be the top guy. And I'm going to be honest with you, Saul probably thought, I'm really in touch with God. Like, God and I are on the same page. I am working, fighting, doing God's work. And then he looks and he sees these people who are something called, they follow this Jesus guy, right? Not a great guy. He's kind of a problem guy. And now he's got a bunch of followers stirring up even more problems, saying that we're wrong. We're the word of God here, Saul says. So he goes out and says, you know what? I'm going to fight God's enemies for him. I'm going to go and round up all of his enemies, all the followers of Jesus, and stone them, kill them all. And he's going to go even further, and he's going to say, this is how good of a follower of God I am. I'm going to get documentation and approval from the Sanhedrin to not just work here in Jerusalem. I'm also going to go to Damascus and round them up there as well, bring them back and stone them too. I'm going to eradicate all of God's enemies. I'm going to be number one. But we all know what happened on that road. Jesus shows up and says, no, you've got it all wrong. Those people you thought are my enemies, when you're persecuting them, you're persecuting me. And he's blinded by, I don't think he's blinded just by the light and the presence of God, but by the guilt and the realization. And when those scales come off of his eyes and his sight is restored, he realizes the mistake he's made. The grave, life, career-long mistake he's made. And he writes in 1 Corinthians 15, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit here. He says, I am the least, unworthy to even be called a Christian because of the things that I have done. But the beautiful thing about this is the very next thing he says. In the very next verse, he says, yet, or despite myself, it is by the grace of God that I am who I am, that I'm still here. And his grace towards me was not in vain. You see, on the other side of each one of our failures is grace. Each mistake met by God's mercy. See, God has not asked us to be good enough. It's not a quota he's trying to meet. Our worthiness in God's eyes has nothing to do with us and everything to do with Jesus. Like when Jesus spoke of faith in Matthew 17, when he spoke of the faith like a mustard seed, you know that story, right? He's not talking about how big your faith is, but he's talking about how big the one you have faith in is. It's not about the scope, how big or small you are. It's about how big and how perfectly complete he is. It's about not the ratio of how good, the good to bad in our own lives, but the complete, unlacking perfection of his character. Because for all the examples, all those examples we listed, and there are many more, not to mention looking at outside of the Bible, looking at history itself, of the humanity of failure. But there was one who was different. Amen? One who was different. And unlike the rest of us, we've gone through some difficult stuff, right? It hasn't always been easy. This guy had nothing easy. Everything was against him. He was born with a bounty on his head. How many have been born with a bounty on your head? Who can claim that one? I wouldn't want to be born under those conditions. Had to flee the country, live in Egypt for a few years, come back and live in Nazareth. Now, Nazareth, for those of you who don't know, was a tiny village, maybe of a few hundred people, almost entirely made up of workers. It was like a little worker settlement. And when people talk about nothing good ever comes out of Nazareth, it means that those people there that live in Nazareth, they are the least of the least. If you had the stupidity to bring your business to Nazareth, you brought your business to die. There was nothing good came from Nazareth. It was complete lack of opportunity. It was the lowest of the low. It was mostly farmers and maybe a few trades workers. That's it. That's where he grew up. He grew up in a city, a tiny town devoid of opportunity. And to top things off, his father probably died when he was pretty young. And so now he's living with his mother and his siblings and in a tiny little village with no economic possibility, has to become a worker. Many of us believe a carpenter or a mason or a stone worker or something like that to just provide, and he does that. Jesus, the Son of God, does that for a decade at least. Hard manual labor just to get by. And then eventually, when he's at a wedding in Cana, he decides it's time to begin my ministry. And he's excited because I'm sure he's hoping he wants to partner with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and he's trying to win them over like he was in the temple when he was a boy, trying to show them the light, enlighten them, and say, we're going to take the Jews in a new direction. We're going to enlighten everyone. I am so excited for this. How did the Jewish leadership respond? Called him a heretic, called him a blasphemer, and planned to kill him, and attempted to multiple times. And at the end of it all, on top of all these things, Satan himself is personally intervening constantly, trying to get him to make a single mistake. And at the end of his life, all his friends betray him. Some of them deny they even know him. All his peers hate him. The whole crowd is saying, kill him. And the government says, sounds good. We'll kill him off, even though the government leader, Pilate, says, I know this guy did nothing wrong, but I'm going to do it anyways. But with the lowest odds of success, the least chance to make it, on our behalf, he succeeded where we could not. Amen? And because he took our punishment, he gives us the opportunity to step back into God's presence and claim to believe in him. Not because of anything that we've done. Not because we're qualified somehow, but because he is so ultimately qualified that our own shortcomings are nothing in the presence of his amazing and unending, everlasting, all-encompassing, perfect love. And you see, it's not about you or me at all, or any title that we attempt to claim, because the truth of audacity is that it means the willingness to take a bold risk. And God looks at us, each of us, and our failures, our mistakes, the insult our lives are to his character. And he sees us and says, having mercy on you is a risk I'm willing to take. I'm willing to do it. And right there, at the first sin, at the apple, or whatever fruit it was. We'll say apple because, that's kind of what we culturally think it was. It's on the window. It was an apple. He looked at that apple and he said, this failure right here, this tragedy, God looked at that and said, that's not going to be the legacy of my people. That's not going to be the end of my children. That's not how their story ends. God has the audacity to look at each one of us in our brokenness and say, I still choose you. I still want you. I still will have mercy on you. I'm going to restore you, and I'm going to bring you home. And Jesus stepped up and said, I'm going to make it happen. And when he stepped up to that pedestal and he took the punishment for that bite, he said, old deal's off. This deal done, new deal. And he walks up and presents that same simple question that Adam and Eve were posed with. He says, if you want to take a bite. Don't do it though. I'm encouraging you, I'm urging you, please don't do it. Take my hand. Take my hand, come home. And he asks again and again, no matter how many bites we take, I take another bite, come home. Come home. Because Jesus didn't just take the punishment for the first bite. He didn't take the punishment just for the bites leading up to when you met him. He took the punishment for any bite you could possibly take, and then some. He said, it's not about the weight of your sin. It's about the magnitude of mercy. Amen? It's actually pretty good. And each time he comes back, no matter how far we fall, no matter how many, we can hold on to grace for a while, and sometimes, as we all do, we get seduced. It looks sweet, and we get caught up, and then we end up at that low place again, and God says, I still love you. I will still forgive you. I still want to restore you. I'm still going to bring you home. Take my hand. Please, take my hand. And that offer is extended to us in any circumstance, no matter where we are. Maybe you're David right now, in the pit of despair. You've killed a man. You've been unfaithful. You've slept with a woman and had a child and killed someone for it. Killed her husband just to try to cover it up. And now his whole world knows about it, and he is ashamed, disgusted. They are too. And he's at the pits. God still looks at David and said, come home. Maybe you're Jonah, and you're running. God has been calling you to something. Maybe it's something as simple as trust me, and you're running the other way because it's scary. It's scary to trust someone else's plan for you. God looks at you and says, you're running, I'm pursuing. Come home. No matter who you are, no matter your circumstance, God reaches out to you and says, I still love you. I choose you personally. Take my hand. And it just reminds me of, this is the nice thing about giving a sermon twice in the same day is you get to make adjustments. You get to make halftime adjustments. And I was brought to light by Bert and his closing remarks this morning of Hebrews chapter 12. And I just want to close with that, where it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Stop focusing on how many bites you've taken, in other words. Especially that sin that so easily trips us up and slows us down. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. Let us pursue that hand. Let us hold on tightly." And it goes on to say we do this by keeping our eyes on him who saved us. It keeps us by keeping our eyes on Jesus Christ, who gave everything for the opportunity to make a new deal. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. And now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne, saying, "Come home." And so, last thing I want to say is down a little bit further in verse 15. It says, "Until then, look after each other, so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God." So I encourage you all this morning, or I guess this afternoon technically. We may not, in our own ability, be able to have the audacity to claim to believe in God. But God says it doesn't matter. Be audacious anyways. Run that fight. And if you fall, my sufficiency is enough to cover your weakness. Be audacious where you can. My overwhelming audacity will cover where you fall short, which will be all the time. But God says, I'm enough. God says, when you're not okay, I am. God says, when you fail, I am.